Have you ever wondered why so much that we once took for granted is now under severe challenge? Do you feel like your country, indeed the wider world, has changed more quickly in the last 15 years than it did in the 50 before? In pondering what we've changed, what we're changing and where we're headed, how is it that the long march of the left through the institutions, how is it that it's come so far, so fast? Yesterday, as I watched media reports regarding the first assisted suicide in Victoria, I couldn't help but notice the tone was as though it was something to glamorise, to congratulate. Why is it that even institutions like the military now seemed more obsessed with issues of gender than strategy? Why are police officers in Queensland so seemingly reluctant to forcibly remove, arrest and prosecute a few dozen ratbag protesters disrupting an entire CBD? And why is it that a supposedly conservative Liberal National Government here in New South Wales is on the verge of introducing the most radical abortion laws in our country? Well, here's a thought to ponder. Maybe part of the explanation for this erosion of time-honoured concepts of right and wrong and long-valued notions of duty, service and civic responsibility is an alliance between the countercultural left and the libertarian right. What most of us would regard as the traditional order is under assault, not just from usual suspects, the lefty activists who reject all the old values as sexist and racist, but also from libertarians who take one important, absolutely important Western value, and that's freedom, and turn it into a radical objection to any notion that we have a responsibility to preserve the wider social fabric, or that we just might be our brother's keeper after all. Normally, we would regard suicide as a tragedy. If it's a young person, it's a sad waste of life. If it's an older person, it's the callousness of a society that throws people on the scrap heap too soon. There's got to be a massive double standard when we rightly grieve over the suicide epidemic affecting young war vets, for example, while at the same time legislate to make euthanasia so-called a humane option for people fearing a painful death, when we don't instead better fund palliative care or realise that once we legalise death, the terminally ill, it won't be long before other categories are included, like young people under the age of 18, as is the case in some European countries. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't underestimate the suffering of patients with a terminal illness. Like so many of us, it's touched my family as well. But when laws are meant to protect the most vulnerable, how sure are we that older Australians won't eventually be expected to take the deadly pills now available to avoid the trouble and expense of their twilight years, particularly as bed availability and the cost of our aged care system increases to be almost out of reach for people on average incomes? Again, on the issue of abortion, now, I wrote about it in the News Corp Sunday papers on the weekend. It was the hardest column I've ever had to write, but we shouldn't, as a columnist me, as a society or indeed a parliament, opt out of issues we find hard to discuss. I don't sit in judgment on the tens of thousands of women every year who feel that a termination is the only realistic choice open to them. I'm more than prepared to see first trimester abortions treated as a women's health issue rather than a matter for the criminal law. Indeed, that's been the case in New South Wales for almost 40 years, but late-term abortions, especially after 22 weeks, when a baby can often survive outside the womb with the right medical care, they're a very different matter. By that stage, there's a baby to be considered too, not just the rights of the woman. On one hand, we're legislating for the right of a person to be allowed to die if they want, and on the other hand, the baby in utero that could survive if born gets no say in whether they live or die. And please, as women, as men and as a community, we have to say that 80,000 abortions per annum is unacceptably high in a country with a population of only 25 million. The US, with 13 times our population, record less than 8 times our abortion rate based on the most recent available statistics. And then there's birth certificates with no gender, bans on Christmas cards and Christmas carols. Am I the only one who think things are turning upside down too quickly and with not enough thought or even understanding of what we're putting at risk? Part of the problem is that people who respect what stood the test of time, as opposed to embracing change for change's sake or asserting individuals' rights to do whatever they like, they're dismissed as conservatives. And conservative has nearly always been a pejorative term in our public discourse, even though a conservative is really just a political conservationist. Someone who cherishes the true, the beautiful and the good in our culture and doesn't want it thrown away, especially for things of lesser value. As for freedom, well, it's very important. It's at the heart of a good society, but my freedom is always limited by the right of others to freedom. And then there are all the other things worth cherishing: respect, decency, honour, liberality rather than mere liberty, that all go to make the world a better place. Freedom is precious, there's no doubt about that. Just ask the Hong Kong protesters. But we can't make a totem out of it without playing into the hands of those who don't value freedom at all.